Okay. Hi, everybody. And Michael, if you'd be so kind as to send the link to you and to Olivia. Appreciate that.
That was done earlier, a couple hours ago.
Okay. I hope they recognize what it is. Well, welcome everybody, and we have our Seeds of the Infinite work, the Identify as Being work. I'm sometimes calling this, the science of non-relations. Usually our studies are quite different, but this is not an ordinary class. It's just a kind of one class out of many that are very different from this one, or this is very different from the others, which deal with the great science of relations. But here we're more interested in this oneness factor that does not really allow for any kind of real other. In the beginning of the Secret Doctrine, we have quite a few little stanzas about the eternal parent, and who is wrapped in her ever invisible robes, and she slumbered for 7 eternities. I think that's the bridge from there to what we are talking about here. And of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that speech will open the door for us. I suppose that will come more as a surprise. But at least I think speech is sort of leading the horse to water, we might say. We're all the horses in this particular case, and what really will allow for the drinking, that's another matter. I want to welcome you, you brave ones. Of course, Michael is here and helping guide us, and Joe is here from the communications team, that team that's doing such a good job to bring the various webinars and broadcasts to you, so that we can fulfill the Tibetan statement that the teaching will go over the radio, starting from 1975. And we certainly see how the literal idea has been transformed. So welcome to Anne Peterson and Veronica and Annette and Brennan and Catherine, Frederick, Heike, Jesse, and I mentioned Joe, and then Joan, Leslie, and Loretta, and Margot, and Martine, Miro, and Suzanne, Tia, Yvonne, and Zipporah. and a few other brave ones will come along. It's the terminology that we're using to arrive at an experience of utmost simplicity. The terminology can be problematic unless we get used to it. Now, I have been sending you some little seeds, some of them not so little. Every day I've been trying to send along a little seed of the infinite. I have many, and not all of them are appropriate, and some of them are repetitious, and I've been trying to find ones that will be interesting to you, and I leave you on your own to work with them and see, if you wish, where they lead you. Now, some of you have said, I think my head's going to blow apart, and I sometimes talk jokingly of the destruction of the mind so that a higher type of mentality can enter. And we call that higher type the transcendental mind. At least it begins there on the Buddhic plane, a kind of a higher function of the planet Mercury. The concrete mind will not bring us where we need to go, but it will at least help us eliminate some of the illusions. It's very interesting, that at the borderland between the top of the higher mind, the highest point of tension in the higher mind, and the Buddhic plane, two planets which are very mental are ruling, and they are Mercury and Saturn. They are planets of discipleship, and we use them in that way to bring us to a state of accepted discipleship, but they are also planets of a keen discrimination between something less real and something more real, between the cosmic etheric planes of Shambhala, what we call the most real part of the cosmic physical plane, and then the dense physical body, not our dense physical body, but the dense physical body of the planetary logos and of the solar logos, the lower three planes. So Saturn and Mercury are involved in this viveka, which is the fine art of discrimination between the real and the unreal. And I think one of the things that happens is that we keep on thinking that we're going to reach what is real by extending the methods through which we work in the unreal. But then I think we get surprised, and that it's not just by extending those methods that something more real and unexpected comes into focus. It's like a whole new thing. And maybe some of what we'll be talking about today will be about a whole new classification of perception, which is very unexpected when we compare it to how we usually perceive within the dense physical body of our planetary logos and even the dense physical body of our solar logos. I mean, you'd think that when we finally focus within the egoic lotus, excuse me, or within our own causal body, that we'd be in the realm of reality. But it turns out that as far as the solar God is concerned, we're still in his dense physical body when we focus even in our causal body. Nevertheless, it must be done. I mean, so much of what we're missing in our meditation is the ability to focus in the causal body. He says we'll be much more successful in our meditation when we can, let's see what I would do here to try to make that more visible. So when we can, can't get this, yeah, well, anyway, there it is. When we can finally focus within this flower, as it were, the flower being a great symbol of unfolding consciousness and ability, when we can finally focus in the causal body and dwell within the world of our accumulated virtues, we all have those accumulated virtues, then we'll be much more successful in meditation. And in the book Letters on Occult Meditation, he tries to teach us the way to do that. Now, at a bare minimum, we have to try to learn how to do that in this kind of class, this kind of broadcast. But basically, turns out that we're trying to move even beyond that. We're trying to move into a kind of focus which is of the abstract mind, which is a little bit beyond the causal body. The focus within the intuitive mind, which is the mind of pure reason or inclusive reason. We've talked about that. And, if we're fortunate and lightning strikes, we'll be able to focus more in the world of world of being, the world of pure being, the world of the monad. I guess that's one of those terms we use a lot. Maybe the word monad, we use it a lot, but we don't really know what it means. We don't have the experience. So, I've sent you every day as much as I can. I might have an overlap past midnight one fine night or whatever, but I have sent you seeds to promote or stimulate your contemplation or your entry into a different mode of perception. Now, how we all get there depends on how much we want to get there. That's number one. And whether we can raise our point of tension enough to begin to eliminate our ordinary perceptions and have something new come in. Now, I thought I would deal with time and space today, but I discovered that it's just, too much. So I'm going to undertake some aphorisms, some seeds, which have to do with space. And, the way to do that, at least the way I've been doing it, is in a quasi-meditative mode. In other words, it's not just that you have your pen out and you're taking notes or taking notes on your computer. You might do that, but it's a bit more of meditating along while we're learning. It's not a pure meditation and it's not a pure lecture. It's something in between. And if what I say doesn't make sense to you, and so often it doesn't entirely make sense to me either, then just reserve judgment, because I think you'll get into this kind of pursuit in your own way. Yeah, I mean, we all, everybody builds the Antakarana themselves, and they have a unique approach to higher points of tension. So you will find yours, and I'm finding mine, and we all find our unique way in. But probably once we find our way in, there'll be a lot more in common than there is difference. The different ways, it's like you go up the mountain from so many different sides of it, or different areas along the circle. But once you're on the very pinnacle of it, whatever mountain that happens to be, because there's always going to be a taller mountain, once you're on the pinnacle of it, it doesn't make any difference how you chose to get there. Your view is very similar, maybe identical, to the views that others pursuing other paths have followed. So your unique way of building the Antakarana is in process of formulation. Now, of course, you can make notes if you wish. And then it probably helps in some ways if you want to focus on a particular item here. There are a number of these sentences that have to do with space. And we will, feel the same frustration as the Tibetan, only in a less acute form, because words themselves are not going to convey in any totally infallible manner the experience that we try to convey. And maybe the Senzar method of communication, the ideographic, colored sounding, pictographic language, maybe it's much more suitable. But we do not yet have the ability to deal with the Senzar. That's more the initiate language, and there have been some books about it, maybe, but we'll get into that at some time. The Tibetan basically is translating from the Senzar, and he may be just looking at one particular sounding colored symbol, and in order to present it to us, he has to use many, many words. And even then, we don't grasp the whole thing. So in a kind of quasi-meditative mode, I'll go over this latest one, of these seeds of the infinite. And if during the past week or so there have been any particular seeds that I've sent out that intrigue you or you want to ask about, then we'll have a chance to do that too. But every day at least maybe take a look at what I've sent you and see if there's any kind of response and whether there's any kind of interest in going further with the understanding of that seed. I may put forward a seed that I partially understand and which is susceptible of deeper understanding. So let's kind of get into a meditative state a little bit. And the first thing I'll say is a general statement. A little drink of water here. That extension in space is essentially an illusion. Now, there are many ways of defining space, and the idea of extension is that the various things we perceive are not all in the same place. Of course, maybe they are, but our normal perception, right in front of me, if I open my eyes, I must see 50 to 100 different items. And they seem spread out. And each has its own space or interval, its own location. And what I want to say is that idea of extension, which goes on as far as the scientist is concerned for maybe even billions of light years, because we have such apparently vast universe, that is, from the point of view of reality, it's an illusion. So I'm saying that extension in space is essentially an illusion, that this is an artifact of our consciousness. It's, I think, Immanuel Kant was onto this when he basically said time and space are modes of perception, and they come from our particular perceptual apparatus, but they're not necessarily real. It's how the real appears to us. So, I walk a mile, I walk 5 miles, I take a car for 100 miles, whatever. That shows us that there is what we normally call extension. And a starting point and an ending point and the interval between. But maybe that's just how our perceiving mechanism perceives. And that if we get hit by reality, reality will appear much different. Then extension in space is essentially an universe. That's kind of a hyphenated phrase I use. Essentially an universe, an illusion born of the notion of boundaries between two or more limited perceptions. Now, these limited perceptions basically are things. That's what a thing really is. It's a limited perception. I may think I'm looking at a water bottle or a glass or something, but and that's a thing, but it's really a mode of seeing. It's a mode of perception. So, it's elaborating on the idea that extension in space is really an illusion because we perceive boundaries, differences, boundaries, or we call it differences between two or more limited perceptions. Right now, I'm looking at three things at once. I could look at two things at once, but there has to be at least two. There can be four, there can be 100. And they all seem to have their boundaries. Now, what I'm trying to prove is that although the eye sees the place where one thing stops and another thing begins, that the heart doesn't see it that way. There's the eyes of the eye, or the eyes of the eyes, and the eyes of the heart. And there's a different mode of perception. We have to learn how to get into that other mode of perception. So I guess my summary there is that the boundaries that we are perceiving right now between things, where one thing ends and another begins, are not really real. They may be actual in the great illusion, but they're not really real. Essentially in universe, meaning dealing with essentiality, the essence of things in a universe. So, basically our normal mode of perception is illusory, even though we have to deal with it as it appears. We have to deal with the world of appearances, and we will forever, and have been doing so forever. But when it comes to what reality is, well, that may be something else altogether. The five senses, and maybe their extensions, you know how it goes, go to cosmic fire. Welcome to Cosmic Fire. You go to Cosmic Fire on this page. I'll try to find it. Treatise on page 188. And what you see there is the five senses, all right, but then you see extensions of them. And, this is a whole study in its own right. For hearing, you have clairaudience on the astral plane, and for touch, the sense of touch, you have psychometry, and for sight, you have clairvoyance, and for normal taste, you have imagination, and for normal smell, you have emotional idealism. So on every level, there are extension of the five, and on it goes until we reach the Buddhic plane and the sort of fifth plane from below of the Buddhic plane and the fifth plane from below of the Atmic, and that's as far as he takes us. Really, there are probably 49 of these, 7 per plane, 7 per systemic plane, you know, our etheric, physical, our astral, our mental. Those are the normal systemic planes. So let's see here. The 5 senses perceive these boundaries. You know, we might say, well, here's a visual object, and then it butts up against another visual object. Even if it's just apparently a space, an interval, it's still an object to the perceiver. Here's a sound that I'm hearing, and then another sound. Here's something I'm touching with a certain texture, and then another touch. If I run my hand over this keyboard and then suddenly find my hand on my mouse pad, it's a difference. And I notice that difference through one of the 5 senses. There can be changes of taste as you eat one type of food after another. Taste changes. And changes of smell. You go into one room, let's say, maybe someone's been using an aerosol or, you know, some kind of air freshener, and then you go into another room and it's not there. It's a change. And then there's that sort of borderland between the changes. Now that's what the 5 senses are perceiving. And probably you could extend that idea onto the higher planes with the higher correspondences of the 5 senses. But the heart, now this is a different thing, you know, like I've always said, get your heart active if you want to perceive something differently. The heart negates such illusory boundaries because of or through the perception, or maybe I call it the infuception, of shared substantiality or shared presence, identical presence. I don't care how things look, how they appear, what their quality may be. There's something identical at the root of all of these apparent changes and differences. What was Heraclitus was saying, well, there's nothing, the only thing that is constant is change, you know, so he was being a little more than a little paradoxical there, that change is the only thing that exists. But I tend to say, well, the only thing that is constant is that which is constant. And that has nothing to do with how much movement there is and how many differences there are, apparent differences. It has to do with something that your heart feels. Remember that the heart has many degrees of opening. But some of the higher degrees of opening have to do with the Buddhic plane. And the Buddhic plane is a plane of fusion in a way. It detects something underneath it all. And that's even more so for the monadic plane and the higher you go. So there is, and we studied it in the Arcane School, the doctrine of the eye and the doctrine of the heart. There are two eyes and one heart. And so some of the beginning of oneness perception is a heart-induced perception. And I suppose it would begin to take in the heart and the head and the causal body and the monad. And the monad too is a heart. That whole line of hearts have to do with oneness perception. Okay, the heart perceives no real in-universe boundaries, and the apparent intervals such boundaries cause when perceived. The heart perception is different, and if I'm going to simplify this whole thing, maybe I breathe it in, you know. I'm looking for heart perception, which is not just about love and wisdom. It is about that, but I'm looking for something that's going on in the very center of the heart center, and which tunes us in with a reality that normally gets buried by multiplicity. So the in-universe reality for which we search is usually buried by multiplicity. The many perceptual changes. The heart detects constant, well, I'm going to even capitalize it, constant identicality, the presence. Now, you know, be still and know that I am God, that old saying. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it means that all the many changes and differences and perception going from point to point to point, all that stops. And underneath it all is God. God, the presence, God, the identical one. That's what we're looking for. Let's just think about that for a moment. See, if I see three things in front of me and my eyes go thing, back and forth, you know, one at a time in a sequence, then I'm seeing with the eye, EYE, or the eyes. But if I lock in on the three things all at once. And I kind of erase the boundaries between them. Then I begin to sense something that is the same in all of them. And I'm beginning to see with the heart. What was it? Was it Pascal? I'm trying to remember. The heart has its reasons, which the reason knows not of. I guess that's somewhat related. I mean, we can reason and reason and reason about things with the mind, the eyes of the mind, or we can get into the intuitive heart, which has a certain reason, which is pure reason, and normal reasoning doesn't know anything about it. So you practice looking at a couple, 3, 4 things at once, and instead of picking out little things about those 3 or 4 things, you freeze the image and you find that sameness of beingness, which all of those 3 or 4 things share, in essence. And so basically what you're doing is you're eliminating difference. I mean, you acknowledge it because it is part of the Mahamaya, which means the great illusion, and you have to deal with it cyclically forever. But at the same time, you're finding the one that not only relates the many, but is the many. You're finding the one. And the eyes themselves and normal perception won't do it. Infuception of the heart will do it. So, in general, I make a little statement here that boundaries are intervals, and intervals, boundaries, the kind of borderland between thing and thing, boundaries and intervals are illusory, but they are actual, to be dealt with in the great Mahamaya, which cyclically occurs every time there is a universe. The universe is Mahamaya. Maha means great, and Maya means illusion. The universe is the great illusion. Of course, when we're in the universe, we use words like real, unreal, fact, fiction. And I talk about something being real in universe. But there's only one real, finally. And that is the absoluteness, the absolute. Okay, so maybe one of the summary remarks here is if there is no real extension in space, then there is no real elsewhere. We sometimes say, well, where's so-and-so? Well, he's not at home. Where? He's elsewhere. He's somewhere else. but there is no somewhere else. And that's a thing we have to ponder right now. Now, this is one of those infuceptions. This is one of those realizations that is not in line with our normal experience. What's going on outside there, outside of this room, is elsewhere. It's not here, it's there. But what happens if there is no elsewhere? Let's ponder on that for just a moment. What are the implications if there is no elsewhere? What happens if our usual sense of location is seen as illusory? Oh, X lives in Arizona. Y lives in New Mexico. What if there's no space between them? What happens if you are literally everywhere? If you are omnipresent? What happens if you're just as much present on Pluto right now as you are in the room where you're sitting? So admittedly, our definition of space would undergo a real readjustment. And we might find eventually that although we perceive space or the interval between things or extension in our field of perception, even though we perceive that, it's not real. Now, that's going to be a heart perception. The mind can kind of talk about it, but that sense of compressing everything down to a point which has no dimension, that's going to be a different realization altogether. No real elsewhere. That's one of the points I want to make. I don't care how far out you go in terms of definite numbers and astronomical units and light years and all that. What if those intervals don't really exist? And in a way, it's all here. Now, you can't really use the word here without a there. But what if this indivisible beingness that we are is equally everywhere? And basically, if every here is the same here, and there is no there, that would be called superimposition. All the points are the same point. So you kind of ponder it and you kind of live with it. And nobody's really gone anywhere. Those who are dead are right here. The farthest planet in our solar system is right here. The farthest galaxy is right here in terms of the indivisible essence of things. Now, I think we can see how that would really help with the art of identification. Suddenly you are, let's say, the very person you're trying to understand. The very thing you want to look into, you are it. But it's got to be an experience, We can talk about it, but it's got to be an experience. So we've been pondering a little bit on the meaning of no real elsewhere and using the heart to realize yourself as the non-bounded in-universe presence. Basically, and really, in the ultimate sense of real, you have no boundaries. There is a boundless, immutable principle, and there's nothing but it. And even though the universe seems to have a boundary, that boundary is just an act of self-perception. It's not real. Now, we can say, what are we talking about here? But, we're dealing a little bit with omnipresence. We talk about God. God is omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. Okay, but what do we really mean? This is an attempt to talk about the omnipresence of you, not the you see in the mirror, but the essential you, the omnipresence. Okay, so let's just say all this deals with the omnipresence in universe of you. Now, the universe is just a drop in the bucket, and there's a mystery here about how you collapse an entire universe into a dimensionless point. You got to realize when you take a pencil and you make a point, it still has dimension. If you get down to measurement, it's got a width, it's got a height, all that. But that's not the kind of point I'm talking about. This point is a specific thing that is next to nothing. But that's kind of another subject a little bit. What can we grab out of all this? The real you. is a non-bounded in-universe presence. And when you're practicing, let's just say, when you, I use a capital there, you practice the presence of God, you are really practicing the presence of yourself. That extended, well, how can you be extended in non-extension? It's just one of those experiences we've got to realize. If it's God, it's you. If it's being, it's you. You're practicing the presence of yourself everywhere. And of course, that everywhere is really nowhere. Now, this may seem, kind of a long way from improving our character and becoming a useful disciple and, working in the more concrete world. But beneath it all is the Buddha's suchness. He didn't even bother to define it, really. Underneath all those things that you had to do, and he was a great one for discipline and making sure you did those things. He was called the lion, and he had a first-rate personality, says the Tibetan. But beneath it all was this intangible suchness. Everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The everywhere part is still, illusory because there is no elsewhere, but in the world of our usual imagination, how we perceive things, there is an everywhere, and you are there, and you are it. But finally, any idea of normal location and extension just has to go out the window because it's not real, which doesn't give you the excuse, of course, of not dealing with it, because it is a necessary illusion, and you got to deal with the world. You have become the world, and there's a right way to deal with it and a wrong way. So, just a little bit in summary here. The illusion of extension in space is caused by the limited perception of a limited bounded perceiver. Now, what we usually think ourselves as being is we're just a limited little thing here that perceives in a limited way. So we perceive this, then we perceive that, then we perceive that. The sequence is there. But if we're not limited, we don't have to deal with sequence. If we're everywhere at the same time, there is no sequence. The heart doesn't have to worry about sequence. The eye is always worried about sequence. So essentially in universe, you are not a limited bounded perceiver. You look in front of the mirror and say, well, this is who I am and all that. You are, in fact, the unbounded, simultaneous perceiver of the whole universe. But that's going to take illusory time to realize. Once we realized it, before we began our emanative journey into ever lessening scope, smaller, smaller, smaller. Once we knew that, and again, we will know that. Somebody knows that. The you that is the great universal being. You haven't really left home, even though you left home. You know what I mean? It's like the candle, big candle. It lights two more candles and it keeps burning. And then comes the constant lighting of progressively of the candles, and the big candle keeps burning. You are at home, and you are all of the divisions also. Now, maybe the heart will help us realize that. You know, the story about the Christ is that he was a figure, maybe a woman, whose name was Maitreyi. Kind of fits when you think of him as the Lord Maitreya, but he had all the Upanishadic realizations from the Upanishads. In India, he had all that. So somewhere behind his ability to serve everybody in very specific ways lies these great realizations that the Upanishads give. So he was brought up in ages past on the great oneness philosophy. And then, you know, it became very practical, and he was able to serve the little things we have become, which do need the service. So if you really are going to be one day again the unbounded simultaneous perceiver of the whole universe, and I want to say essentially unbounded, then you have to discover your rings pass not and dissolve them one after another. I mean, you know, you can, how do you get rid of a ring pass not and go into something else? You know, that dotted line that exists on the mental plane, that means you can only think concretely. But then you find yourself thinking in the higher mind. Something's happened. A ring pass not has been dissolved, or it's been thinned, something, attenuated to the point where it's not a barrier anymore to that higher point of tension that we call the higher mind. And on it goes, on it goes. Rings pass not, keep on dissolving, or you keep on punching through them, or you, however you do it, you know, you burn them up, whatever you do, depending on your monadic ray and your soul ray, you will be getting rid of the rings pass not that stop you from realizing more. Of course, generally, there's a little exception there. You got to fulfill your karma within a particular ring pass not before you're given permission to establish a newer one, which is broader and deeper. So, you know, just think about your ring pass not at the present time and what you're trying to do to make sure it's not a barrier anymore to your next entry, or you can call it your next initiation, because that's what initiation is. It's an entry into a new point of tension. And from every more intense point of tension, you see more and you can do more. And you identify as more. So when we're meditating, when we're building the Antakarana, we are busy somehow making that ring pass knot more permeable so we can get through it and into a higher revelatory point of tension. So dissolve your rings pass knot through meditation and through service. There's something about the heart which is so liquefying, you might say, that when you're really serving, it's just not good for the ring pass knot. The ring pass knot does not remain as an insuperable barrier. It starts to get thinner and thinner and more porous, and will disappear, and you'll be into a new sphere with a new ring pass knot. So, a few more things. When you're busy getting rid of your ring pass knot, you're supposed to detect the sequence of, it's an illusory sequence of the object, the boundary, and the next object. I can look at anything. The object, that apparently thin boundary, and the next object. That's getting rid of a confining ring pass knot. We're supposed to negate the sequence of object, boundary, and next object by realizing the essential non-dimensionality of spaces. Now, if we thought that spaces from here to there are real, they would have dimension. They would have a certain width or length or height or something. But spaces that we perceive in our normal perception end up being non-dimensional, because those kinds of dimension of length, width, height, they all collapse in the point. So every extended thing is really on its way one day to becoming a point which has no dimension. I admit there's a lot of little secrets in that kind of thinking, and the imagination doesn't necessarily want to go that far. But there's nothing I can look at that eventually will not collapse into a non-dimensional point. And all those, so basically, when I'm using the eyes mostly, but you can do it with the other senses. But the eyes do give us 80 or 90% of the perception. I'm looking at an object perception, a boundary perception, and a new object perception. And I want to get rid of that 1, 2, 3. I want them to fuse and to blend. So I'm saying spaces are not real. They may be actual, you may have to deal with them. If you are a skydiver, there is a space between you and the airplane, and the ground, and you better know how to handle it. But I'm talking now about reality and not about the great illusion. So, similarly, negate the sequence of here's an interval, here's a boundary, here's the next interval. Every perceivable object is really an interval in space. That's how we think of it. But what if intervals are not real? What if only a unison is really sounding, like in music? One note, not all these other notes. That requires separation. What if separation is not real? What if the great heresy of separateness, which we all have to overcome, points to a deeper philosophical problem that anything should be separate from anything else? I don't know if there's anybody that wants to go there, but the heart will detect that non-separation. Okay, and I'll even put that down. The heart detects non-separation between apparent things, perceptions. Everything is a perception. Okay, getting close to the end here. So, and when you think about a boundary, does it have any width? Does it have any dimensionality to it? That's a question. Sometimes it seems to. I'm looking at some flower pots and the wooden object on which they sit, and I'm kind of looking at a kind of a sense of a crevice between the two. Does that boundary have some dimensionality to it? It certainly gives us the illusion of the separation of one thing from another. So even the boundary may be, in the great illusion, Mahamyavically, intervallic. A boundary may be a tiny interval, which apparently has dimension. So what do we have to do? We have to negate the sequence of interval, intervallic boundary, and the next interval, or space, by realizing the essential non-dimensionality of intervals. You're looking at a bunch of intervals between things. Here's a knob on a cabinet. Here's a statue. There's the apparent interval of space between them. And each one of them as an object is an interval as well. Intervals are based on separation, and separation finally is not real. And the heart will detect that, but not the eye. So, one more thing we have to do is ponder on the non-dimensionality of perceived intervals. How far is it from New York City to Los Angeles? It's an interval. And the whole city of New York is an interval. And the whole city of Los Angeles is an interval. And all of them are actual, and none of them are real. And the heart knows that. Every elsewhere is really here. It's not exactly technically correct, but you get the idea. Every place else is not else, it's right here. And there's a great superimposition going on which negates the reality of space. So erase apparent boundaries. There is no elsewhere. It's not for the sake of practicality that we have such thoughts, because in the practical world, we have to deal with things as they appear. And we have to, because they are really extensions of ourself. And this is a great creation, dance, drama, whatever you want to call it, happening. But beneath it all is this substantiality that the heart detects. Regardless of all the apparent change and distinction and intervals and things, the many are the one, and the one is the many. Okay, so that's, that's all for the lecture here, so to speak. And maybe, it may have triggered something in your thought. I think, breathing with the heart is really important. It's an imagination. You are not confounded by perceptions. You are breathing in the infuceptional mode of the heart. And then maybe we have a little chance of registering this this non-thinghood of things. And then what we do with that, well, let every one of us figure it out, what we do with that. But certainly it's going to help us with love, wisdom. It's going to help us with intelligence. It's going to help us with will. It's going to help us with all those things we need in the relative world. And the initiates, the high ones, the masters and so forth, they have this. And thus the Buddha spoke of suchness which he had realized. Okay, so now if you have anything that you want to suggest or ask, we can do that, and like we usually do. And maybe more light will be the result.
Michael.
So, yes.
There are some comments in the chat box already.
Oh, gosh, that's a good sign.
And this first one from Jesse goes back to an earlier portion of the lecture. And then she wrote a second one. The first one is singularity, and the second is Maya, shards of the perceiver. And I was wondering if perhaps Jesse would like to expound a little bit on what she has written. Jesse, you are able to unmute yourself.
if you wish. Yeah, if you wish. Did you say shards as in pieces? Pieces?
Yes, it says shards,
Shards, like
Shards.
when you
Yes.
break something and it goes into very many pieces. Okay. If you wish, Jesse, or if you want to just stand on those words, then we can um, look at them.
Well, she's showing a microphone that's muted, but she said she has no mic.
Ah, well, the things about shards is they seem to be disconnected, but the thing about emanation from the one self-perceiver in the universe, is that all of those perceptions are connected. We call them emanations. I don't think there's anything that is not coherently descended on the emanative stream from the one. So read the first part of it again, Michael, please.
Well, Jessie did unmute herself momentarily.
Okay.
Would you like to go ahead again, Jessie?
Okay. What was her very first part of that offering in writing?
Well, the first thing that she wrote was singularity. And so,
Singularity. Okay.
right.
Sometimes scientists use that to talk about the Big Bang in relationship to the physical level, and I suppose now increasingly the etheric physical level. As long as scientists think that all of our psychological and spiritual states derive from matter, they have no problem with proposing a kind of singularity from which all physical things come and thereby generate all other things. But of course, we students of esotericism, we are rather convinced that the gross descends from the subtle, and that it's basically a psychospiritual universe which produces the outer universe that is connected with the singularity. But I think singularity, depending on how we understand it, is a good way to think of the logos of any particular universe. It's not the ultimate singularity, which is super universal in my view, and it may actually compress down to the only infinitesimal in town, really, but it's still the one as far as we are concerned when dealing with a universe. So singularity and multiplicity. And the shards of singularity are all emanative self-perceptions proceeding by law and logic into their present scope and depth. So there's nothing disconnected. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And there's nothing illogical about, when you get into a blast that blows things, we say, to smithereens, we just think there's a scattering effect. But it's much more coherent than any kind of scattering effect. The production of the many, many objects of perception through emanation is different from just the blast that scatters the pieces. So we really want to look for the logical connection between pieces of different scope. And then we will be able to make sense out of the old biblical saying regarding the one in whom we live and move and have our being. The emanative source is that one. And the final source for any universe, well, we are that eventually, we realize again, but the final source for any universe is the universal logos. And when we've done the dance of 10 trillion veils, you know, getting rid of one ring past knot, one veil after another, we'll realize who and what we are, and that all multiplicity, all the many, have proceeded from us in a very logical, lawful, and coherent manner.
And so Jesse has provided some clarifications. Being a non-form based singularity, which is instead beingness based, and therefore Maya is created by the mind-made shards of the perceiver.
The mind-made
Shards.
Yeah. Okay, we can use that word, but I will just say self-perceptions, because I think it keeps the rationality of the whole process in our minds. In other words, there are constant willed self-reductions that go all the way down to the smallest energy unit, the ultimate particle event, whatever, that is possible in any universe due to the will of the one who is making itself the many. So if you like to use the word shards, that's fine. I prefer to use perceptual self-reductions or emanations that lead us all the way down to the tiniest unit of substance energy that is allowable in a cosmos. You say it's being based? Yeah, okay. See, you know, who is the universe a subject or an object? Is the universal logos a subject or an object? And I would say that within the universe, it's a subject. But in relation to the absolute super universal God, it is also a kind of object of that super universal God perceiving a tiny, finite aspect of itself within the absolute infinity. So I'm kind of making a split here for the sake of understanding that there is a universal God, but it's limited. And the reason it's limited is because the super universal God perceives only a fragment of itself, which it sends into objectivity or finitude. So in other words, I'm the super universal God, okay, and I decide yet again what will be the theme, the archetype, the kind of interactivity that's going to characterize the coming universe. The universal logos, the universal God, is of the same essence as I, the super universal God, am. Same essence, but one is finite and the other is infinite. The super universal deity is infinite, and the universal logos is essentially infinite, but is manifesting in a finite manner. I know that some of that might be a little, you know, what is he talking about again? But I think that we can get the idea that every universe is a tiny finite aspect of absolute infinity. And what is absolute infinity? It is basically the universe, super universal God seeing itself as boundless, but articulated, but boundless. So those, I think, are mysterious things. But let's just say this. There is a time in eternal duration when universes don't exist. Now, it's hard for us to think about that, about the non-existence of the universe. But they've been going on forever. And there's a time when the great super universal deity is not sending an aspect of itself. We sometimes call it the ray of the absolute, is not sending an aspect of itself into the finite universal state. And that happens cyclically forever. So no universe, universe, no universe, universe. We sometimes call it the great breath. I don't think, how are we going to solve this, but we look at certain thoughts that point towards thinking about it with more clarity. Okay.
Next, Heike has written in the chat box, infuception, identifying as and being in oneness, in my experience with something, has no outside space. But for me, it is a kind of inner space without outer perception or boundary, which disappear in that identical presence. The inner space is much bigger than what is seen with the eyes, although to say bigger is wrong too. In those moments, there is only that. I mean, in my experience, as something.
Okay, this is very well articulated. And, I think that the words you're using demonstrate that there is some reality in your consciousness to this kind of process. I mean, you've used words that are also from the abstract mind, and we could study them carefully, but it seems to be based on experience or inperience, whatever. And you're using words that are evocative, and they suggest someone who is in that process. Obviously, language is going to be a limitation for all of us at all times, the kind of language that we use. But let's hear the reading of it one more time. Michael, are you there?
I'm going back to it. Okay. Infuception, identifying as and being in oneness, in my experience with something, has no outside space, but for me, it is a kind of inner space without outer perception or boundary, which disappear in that identical presence. The inner space is much bigger than what is seen with the eyes, although to say bigger is wrong too. In those moments, there is only that. I mean, in my experience, as something.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And, when we say, thou art that, or I am that, the Leo mantra, or I am that and that I am. That, when we begin to identify its presence as the presence, it doesn't have boundaries. The only thing that has boundaries are the things that arise from that. When we start to come to terms with that, as you are doing, it's a good sign that this substratum is being revealed to you, that it's becoming part of your internal realization. Then we try to find the words to describe it. And I think, basically save what you've written there, because basically, I think that what you've written somehow depicts a real approach to reality, at least the kind of reality that we can experience within a universe. And then when you capitalize the word as, it shows you're getting it. Okay, I mean, in my experience, as something, not with something, because that preserves the duality, but as something gives us the identicality. I use words like substance and substantiality and essence, to describe that which infuception reveals, which is much more unitive and oneness-based than normal perception. So just, keep moving onward into it. Onward moves in life. They onward move in life through intensifying the point of tension until we can be more and more as whatever we perceive. This is progress in the science of being. And I think your words indicate that. Thank you.
There's a couple of things that occur to me from what Heike wrote. It partially reminds me of the TARDIS of Doctor Who, which was bigger on the inside than on the outside.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I was working in the New York area, and I would ask, how far is it from point A to point B? The response would invariably be in time rather than distance.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what HPB calls exact science is extending what they consider as senses beyond these five physical. There's not agreement about what constitutes all of the senses, but there's been at least 21 senses identified. Beyond, in addition to or beyond the five that we generally consider the senses.
Are you, when you say, are you talking about what the Tibetan has offered or other sources for these other senses?
The other senses are coming from exact science, such as proprioception, where a sensing of where we are in space.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when you hold out your hand through proprioception, you can identify where the hand is in relationship to other things.
Okay. It's some sort of locational sense.
Yes, yes.
I wonder what we could best relate it to, probably within the field of sight. at first, but then of course it could be the loudness and softness of a sound, or the faintness or the intensity of a taste or smell. I mean, probably
You,
there are ways to relate such things to the
you can
fundamental.
you can close your eyes and still sense where you are within something. A person who is blind
Mm,
is able to sense where they are in space without vision.
hmm hmm And I wonder which of the higher senses offered um, relates to that. Would it be somehow a form of psychometry? I wonder. Probably there are some fundamentals here that these derivative senses relate to. It would be interesting to me to
Yes,
see which. Yeah,
undoubtedly. But
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I found a little bit of study of that to be quite fascinating.
yeah.
Uh, and there's also some people hear color
Yes,
and,
yes.
and see sound and so forth.
This is the David crossover, the synesthesia.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I had a student once for a short time who was a synesthesiast, and I think he was some kind of artist, and I believe there have been some composers, musical composers, who were in that category, because the devas do uh, have the opposite mode of registration, right? They see sound and they hear. Is it they see sound and they hear color?
Right. And it seems to run in families to some extent.
Hmm. Well, I think there are special heredities. You kind of wonder how so many musicians appeared in the Bach family and its immediate descendants. So sometimes families have a kind of a dharma inducing equipment, and sometimes a karma inducing equipment. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are going to be cleared up in this study of the senses, things that have to do with our perception on the subtle planes. Interesting matters indeed. Good.
And then Jesse wrote, uh, the statements I made came from the mind in the heart and not the mind in the head, which brings me to we need to learn to think with the heart and love with the head.
Yeah, love with the mind. Yeah, and Venus is a very good inducer of that particular attitude. Now, of course, it's interesting that there is a heart in the head center, which is a major chakra, the major chakra of the head center corresponding to the zodiac in a way. So some of this can be solved, that 12-petaled lotus has much to do with expanded feeling of a Jupiterian and Neptunian kind, and yet it is in the head. So the synthesis of sort of an exquisite sensitivity and the intuition and logic, they all gather at this topmost center. And so one can only practice such things. And, to think with the heart, it's kind of it's a normal thing to be thought of by esoteric students, and what exactly is involved, that has to be investigated uh, in a precise manner. I think the heart is related to the transcendental mind of Buddhi, and there you would have both together.
And then Jesse suggests it's created between heart and head by resonance.
Yes, the whole antichironic connectivity is really a question of resonance. It's a question of comparable frequencies and harmonic frequencies. So I think that is a good statement, and how that works for the individual, that has to be worked out in the case of each individual, and then the laws concerning that connection can be established. Basically, from the astrological point of view, we have it's a kind of a Jupiter, Neptune, Venus connection, with Jupiter ruling the heart center, uh, Venus ruling the ajna center, and the heart and the head being ruled, well, by a number of planets, but Jupiter and Neptune are again found there, with Vulcan at the very center. So how do we know when we have the connection between the heart and the heart in the head? And I would just say that the heart in the head seems to have a monadic um, evocation, and that perceptions that are of the monad can come through that particular one, linking the heart center and the Buddhic plane. We know that the Buddhic plane is a 4, the monadic plane is a 2. Those two numbers are very important in our particular solar system, and there is a way to link the one perceived in the monad and the unified or harmonized two-ness of the Buddhic plane, the love, wisdom aspect. So these links are very important. I think it's good to bring them up as you are doing. Okay. But of course, to detect when it is happening, how it is happening, how we can induce it, how we can describe it, there's some labor involved in that, I think. Okay. Anything else, Michael? Okay.
Getting
Are you?
back there. Getting back
Yeah.
there.
Okay.
Okay, from Heike, when we listen to music and then everything outer else disappears, and the music becomes a space, but you don't hear the music in a way you would normally hear, and being able to interpret it, like melody or instruments or rhythm. But
Mm-hmm.
it becomes one and all the movement is within the one, while the one stays unmoved. That's also something where the separate I disappears, in this case, through the initiative perception of the ears.
Initiative or initiating, or let's see. Um, yes, I would say there are these. I would say that music, gosh, how does Master Moria talk about this as a great transport? It's not sort of a step-by-step climbing. When I went to music school, that was one of the disappointing things for me, that we had to take it all apart with the concrete mind, and the great sense of the beautiful unity of the music was left unappreciated. We were just applying the concrete mind to the music. And I suppose that is interesting, and there is a whole, science of harmony, but as Bach said, what is the secret of my harmony? Only I know it. And I wonder, gosh, there's a beautiful statement by Bach about this very thing. And I wonder if I can find this. Let's just see if I can, or whether I cannot. I think, okay, name. Okay, harmony and Bach. Let's see if, no, it's not going to be here, and I would have to go searching for it. But basically, he talked about the secret of harmony which he possessed, and he likened it almost to Plato's Republic and the balance that had to be created. And it was just exquisite. And I see that I'm not going to find it in the AAB extracts. Maybe I can do one more thing here. I know you can't see what I'm doing right now, but it'll just take just a moment. If I can find this. Otherwise, I'll try to find it later. I think later will have to be the time. Yeah. But he explained, as a great fourth ray, second ray soul, he explained the secret of his harmony and, and how it put everything together, everything in its proper place, and not just the divisions of the concrete mind. I think a lot of people who love music, I know I was one, get discouraged by the approach that is taken through the concrete mind in the ordinary university courses on music. It was a big shock to me, actually. Okay, let's see if there's anything else there that... Yeah.
Perhaps before wrapping up with the great invocation, we can finish with Loretta's comment in the chat box.
Yes, I do see it. I do see it. Just one moment, please. The disappearance of the I-ness in the separate I, and the whole idea that in this transport that Master Moria talks about, all these superficialities and tiny aspects disappear in a harmonious, unified oneness, I think is one of the great virtues of the best kind of music. And there is such a way that you are actually, I've had some, inner experiences, and I've heard music where one literally doesn't know where it comes from, except within the whole hierarchy of higher beings, there are those, we're told that the certain angels are ever circulating around the throne of God, and they are singing. And some of them are singing, holy, 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 In other words, they are giving their adoration to the central deity through song and some kind of celestial music. I think we can get echoes of that and participate in that. So, coming from Germany and the great fourth ray soul of Germany, that's going to be one of the great gifts that country offers. Okay, so Loretta, right? You want to read that, Michael?
Yes. She writes, "Thank you. It is nice to be reminded of accumulated virtues. One tends to forget in the quest for more, yet how can one quest for that which we are?"
Mm-hmm.
This is a
Mm-hmm.
seed I felt drawn to and seems to merge into today's seeds. I am the garment of God and that which wears the garment, both, and feel deeply within, quote, for the mask of all faces hide only graces, unquote.
Oh, that's a beautiful sentence. Is that your sentence, or um,
That is Loretta.
is yeah? The mask of all faces hide only graces. Okay. Well, yeah, indeed. So that's the content of the causal body, these virtues, and when the causal body becomes sufficiently virtuous, then it's ready for its destruction. Okay, and one new message below.
From Suzanne, it is good to be reminded of the true vision of the heart. I was reminded of the book, The Little Prince. Thank you. And a very blessed happy birthday to the foundation.
Yes, thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, yesterday we had our little kind of very spontaneous birthday party of 35 years, 35 years of having esoteric psychology at the foundation of so much of what we do. So, and by the way, it's going to be made available to everybody. I've sent it out, and the recording of it. And if you weren't there, you might find it interesting to listen to or look at, but mostly listen to the video that was made from it, from about the beginning of our work 35 years ago, and the way it has developed. Well, I would like to say that I think there are quite a number of you that are getting deeply into what can be indicated by this approach to reality. It's not about all the parts and pieces. We have many courses that deal with the parts and pieces. This is about something that underlies them all, the substantiality, the essence of things, the beingness of things, which underlies all these many aspects. And from what is being said and the responses that are coming out, I would say there are people in this group, and maybe everybody, that are on their way to the kinds of infuception, which it is the purpose of this kind of course or webinar to produce. Well on the way to perceiving unity, oneness through the heart center, and increasingly through the heart in the head center, which connects directly with the monad. Okay, friends, so that will be it for now, and I'll try to keep sending little seeds, sometimes a little bigger than others, and sometimes very simple. There's so many to choose from, so every day I sit myself down and I say, well, okay, what shall it be today? And I suppose there's some inspiration in it at times and some guidance, and sometimes it just may be a matter of chance, but I'll do the best I can to continue sending these seeds to you, and then you ponder them as you will and as you wish. And hopefully something, will emerge for you. Okay. All right, so let's close with the great invocation the way we normally do. Just take me a second here to get to it. And also to even put it on the screen. Okay. And before we get into it, let's just think of the oneness, the essential, the substantial, which really unifies us in the essence. Because here we are together, and there is this essentiality, which is the root of what every one of us is. And it is identical in every one of us, regardless of the many differences between us on a more outward level. So, from the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Oh. Oh. Well, thank you, everyone. Tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. GMT, our glamour work. Plenty to go around there and plenty of work to do. And then in the evening, a treatise on cosmic fire in depth. And by the way, I have sent out 3 substitute programs for the cosmic fire program we had last time, which had some computer mishaps connected with it. So I think I've gone into greater depth, and that should be available on Makara, probably already is. And then we
Michael
go on.
Crow has been putting those 3 programs together into one, along with the question and answers following. Quite an
A long one.
undertaking in itself. And I hope to have that put up on Makara shortly.
I wonder, my goodness, that's going to be a forever program.
It's a long one, yes.
Yeah, it's going to be like, oh my goodness, it's going to be 8 hours long. Oh well, oh well. You don't have to listen to it all at once. And I'll try to review the high points of it tomorrow night, at least here in Europe at night. Whew. All right. Thank you. And lots of love, many blessings. And what I'll do is stop the recording first. And then after I stop the recording, Michael will stop the program. So here goes the recording.